Well, here we are again. Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
Today, we have got just a phenomenal setup.
Well,
you've been excited about this. You've gotten me excited about it. So,
well, we have three pillars that we try to have guests on from time to time. Our first pillar is, of course, faith. And our guests today are Jake Smith and Dan Haseltine from the Grammy-winning Christian rock band still, Jars of Clay. And I got to know both Jake and Dan, gosh, about 15 years ago, when the guys from Jars decided to form this little charity doing work in Africa called Bloodwater Mission. And we've had this great relationship now. It is maybe 15 years, right, Dan?
Yeah.
For a long time. And we'll get to a little how that developed, but we want to start first with for our viewers and for our listeners, a little video.
Great.
Welcome back. And so Dan, looking back 15 years ago, how did Bloodwater start? Like, how did you and the other members of the band, you're wildly successful. You spent the 90s really doing some amazing work in the music industry. I mean, and in terms of Jars of Clay, really kind of revolutionized how people approach faith-based music. In the marketplace, and then you had this idea for Bloodwater, which is still doing tremendous work all these years later, when a lot of groups, quite frankly, have gone by the wayside.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's great to be here with you guys. The way to describe Bloodwater really was that it was born out of at first a definition of what a songwriter is. A good friend of ours said that a songwriter is somebody who looks at the world and describes it, not only as it is, but also as how it could be. And that's where we get a lot of our aspirational ideas or our dreams for, how we can make the world a better place. But the part that I really gathered from it was this whole idea that, well, if you're going to look at the world and describe it, then you're going to have to take that part seriously. And eventually you're going to find something This is the hazard of the role, is that you're going to find something that really captures your heart. And for me, that was taking a trip to Africa and spending time with people and just learning what was happening around HIV and AIDS in the early millennium, and just how it was affecting people on the ground there. And I was just very struck by the resilience of people, and their stories of how they were just so capable. They had all these ideas about how they wanted to help in those communities, but they didn't have a lot of resources to do it. And so what they needed was more like, they just needed the support systems around them, and they needed people to tell their story, and felt like, well, that's what I get to do as a privileged songwriter and performer, is I get to tell stories. So Bloodwater really came out of that. The band just said, let's see if this is something we can invest some energy into and try to make part of people's dinner table conversations. Yeah. So it's a long story from there to now, 18 years later. But the one other piece was, there was a singer-songwriter producer named Charlie Peacock who looked at me and he said, now, if you're going to do this for 5 years, what questions are you going to ask? And he said, and the caveat is that if you're planning on doing this for more than 20 years, there's different questions that you have to ask. And he really challenged us to say, can you be an artist that's different from the ones that just jump on a cause because it's trendy? Do you think you can actually invest your heart into this for the long term? And that was a good challenge, because we said yes.
That's amazing. And how did you come up with the name?
Well, the name really came, it's such a bizarre name for a nonprofit, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it came out of this idea. Well, the reality was that every community that I went into, that our little group went into to learn about HIV and AIDS, these communities where people's immune systems were being compromised, they were in communities where they didn't have access to clean water. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like every time we would go into a community, there would not be access to water. And so they would be going to rivers and streams and places like that, where water was obviously filled with bacteria, opportunistic diseases. And it's the water that was actually really hurting people and killing people at the time. And so we thought, well, we want to maybe connect that. Maybe that's a way to do this for people who didn't understand HIV and AIDS. Maybe they didn't like that. In the US, it had been talked about as the gay cancer, and there were all of these sort of taboo issues around HIV. And so there were a lot of people, especially in the faith community, that didn't want to have anything to do with it. But we thought, well, if maybe they would do something about water, though. And so we wanted to collect that, blood and water, because we knew in Africa the two things people needed access to at the time, from our perspective, was access to clean blood, or blood free from HIV, and clean water. So that's, the name kind of came out of that. And of course, it also ties to a faith perspective of the idea that when the physical manifestation of Christ's sacrifice for people was when blood and water flowed from his side. And so that imagery really struck with me. So I wrote the name Bloodwater on a napkin on a plane, and I showed one of my friends that was traveling with us, and he said, I think that's a good idea. So here we are.
That's fantastic. What a great story.
See, I don't think I ever knew where the name came from. I mean, it was fairly obvious what you're trying to do, but actually binding the two together and also telegraphing to Christ's blood and water when the spear was, when he was pierced.
Yeah.
And you have some songs, you have some lyrics about that. It just came to mind.
Yes. Well, and it's funny, because to this day, we still get people who call into the office and saying, hey, can I come by and give blood? And so it still creates a bit of a mystery around the organization.
Generate revenue if we set up shop out here, had a couple beds and a way to collect blood. At least a month, I think, for the cost. We did that.
And Jake, you've been around for a long time, so how did you get involved?
Yeah, so I got involved. I was working in college athletics at the University of Tennessee, and had been to Africa. I had some sisters that lived there and had some experience with Africa, but was working there. And there's a certain football coach that jilted Tennessee in the middle of the night and left for Chris's beloved
Oh,
USC trip.
you can just name his name. It's okay.
Lane Kiffin, that guy's name. And man, when Lane Kiffin left,
he's not exactly Voldemort, but he's pretty much up there for some people. You know, the name that will not be spoken.
Yeah.
Yes.
He blew up everybody's lives kind of in that. But at the time, I was working for a gentleman named Mike Hamilton.
Yeah.
And Mike was athletic director at the University of Tennessee. And Mike was on the board at Bloodwater, and his story was intertwined with, he had adopted some kids from Africa that were part of this story. And long story short, Mike ended up stepping down as the AD at Tennessee and came to Bloodwater and said, "Hey, I need somebody to come with me and help me raise money and share the calls." And the organization at that point was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old maybe, and was really kind of trying to grow outside of just an organization that was raising money through jars touring and just kind of passing the bucket at concerts to having a bit more defined kind of fundraising strategy. So that's when I joined around 2011, maybe 11 or 12, somewhere in that time frame, and then came back and returned as the executive director of the organization. Left for a little bit and then came back in 2019 as the executive director. So, yeah, we'll be going on 20 years. 2024, I think, will be 20 years. So, talking about Dan asking those questions, I think we're always asking questions, but I think even as we hit 20 here soon, we'll be asking even different questions, and we are asking those questions. So.
Well, leads to a question. How has the vision and the mission changed? What were the surprises from Dan for you going back 20 years or 18 years, and Jake, you going back 11 or so years? What are the things that have been the biggest surprises, maybe the disappointments and the great successes?
Man, that's a great question.
How long is this podcast?
Yeah,
long enough.
Yeah,
We'll take as long as
we got plenty of time.
Well, back in 1873, I think for me, Bloodwater really is a learning organization, and some of that is we were a band. We were musicians, artists. We weren't people that were development experts. We didn't necessarily understand what it takes to do international development. We simply had a passion and a heart and a sense of focus for what we wanted to care about. We didn't know how to do it, though. We didn't have the tools. And so we kind of fumbled quite a bit early on. And we did what a lot of organizations do. We felt like, oh, we're the ones going in and being the heroes and helping to provide clean water. Our first big campaign with the organization was called the 1,000 Wells Project. And our goal was really to provide 1,000 communities with clean water access. And it was a vision that came out of our heads in the West. And the way to implement that and do that was our way of doing it. And I think we started really looking at ourselves and looking at the way Africans were stepping up and implementing these projects or informing the way they should be done. And we started to realize, like, oh, our vision needs to really be, how do we support them? How do we provide just, the wind for their sails? And that was probably the biggest learning, our light bulb that we had early on was, the way that the West has done development work has been predominantly this: we come in, we think we know what's best, we implement things that might work in the West but don't actually work in Africa. We don't empower people over there very well because we kind of come in and really just think that we have the expertise. And sometimes we have the expertise, but most of the time we don't have the knowledge of the communities, the culture, the landscape, geography, like any of that stuff we don't actually know, and we rely on them. So why not just empower them? And that's been the process and that vision since we made that decision to just support local African organizations. That has stuck with us. but it's been a long-term process of learning, how do you do that? How do we keep taking less of ourselves and our ideas seriously and start taking more of their ideas seriously and letting them lead? And it's just a process, but that for me, I think, has been the biggest learning experience over the years.
Interesting. That I guess it makes a lot of sense, because there is a sense that you go into it saying, "Oh, I'm going to do all these things to help, and this is my way," but having the humility to recognize the people on the front lines know a whole lot more about, what needs to be done than someone from thousands of miles away.
Well, what's interesting about that is that you have different campaigns that grew out of the time when Bloodwater was forming that aren't really around anymore, or aren't as maybe effective as they used to be, because they couldn't maybe make that pivot.
Yeah.
Bloodwater kind of came out of the whole one campaign idea, which happened in the early 2000s, formed by Bono and all this idea about dropping the dead and helping Africa with the AIDS crisis that was spreading throughout the country. And I think you made a point about how some people in the faith community really were slow to embrace the whole idea of AIDS as a faith issue. Where do you think that is today? Like, do you think we've transcended that now, or do you think it's still an issue?
I think it's still, I think we really have transcended it on a level. Like, I feel like people are more familiar with HIV in terms of they understand the causes, how it's perpetuated. The story has definitely changed, and I see a lot more churches and faith communities, just really reaching out and stepping up in those areas. I think they learned that they can't really ignore it. It has to be part of whatever holistic investment we want to make into a community. Like, HIV is going to be there. If you're talking about Eastern and Southern Africa, you got to just recognize that this is one of the obstacles and the challenges of some of those areas. So I don't see that as much of the challenge these days. But you brought up the one campaign, and a lot of that was about how do we, as a country, as the West, as the people with more money than anyone else, how do we leverage some of that to be able to provide the things like medications that people need, and help kind of on those broad scale interventions. And they have done such a great job of that now, and getting people to say, oh yeah, we can help with this. It doesn't take much to go a long way. And Bloodwater, in fact, we see that work in the ripple effects and impact of that, because the communities where we work, most of them are getting medications that have been, somewhat subsidized or funded by government programs from the US. So they're saving millions of lives. Antiretroviral drugs for HIV, people wouldn't be able to afford those, and people would die much more readily, but they really are great programs. And so we see like a lot of really great things happening there. My one thing is now, I think our new challenge is that, with all of our domestic challenges here in the US, people become more focused on how can we just help the US? That kind of conversation about, well, we help our own first, we help our own predominantly. I think the church kind of unfortunately has adopted some of that. And so people are less apt to reach out and help communities outside of the US. And so that's the new challenge. And we're really hopeful that people will continue to be generous, and will see that, every human being is a creation of God. Every human being has this intrinsic value, and we don't have to necessarily put up borders as to where we help.
And I would say, just to add on that, in terms of how people see it, if nothing else, the pandemic has highlighted the fact that local health is somewhat dependent on global health. And we, always kind of had a hard time sometimes of drawing the line between, why do I care if somebody is washing their hands or drinking clean water in a community that's thousands of miles away, how does that impact me? And I think what people are seeing now is that if people are unhealthy or immune compromised in villages far away, if and when there are global pandemics and those folks are immunocompromised and do carry viruses longer, that ultimately doesn't just stay in South Africa. It gets to me in Arizona or Tennessee or wherever I might be. So it's a little bit of, a catch-22 in the sense of we have so many needs here, but people are going, oh, wait a minute, I can see now how all this is ties together, and in that sense. So
It it really is I mean, I love the idea that the global health or local health leads to global health, and you can definitely sense that with the COVID issue, there's been a lot of inward thinking and not as much outward. I mean, you see that with vaccinations not being as available for worldwide distribution, and we have our own viewpoints on how COVID has been handled. We won't drag you guys into that discussion.
Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit, Dan. You have been a very successful musician, and tell us a little bit about your journey in the music world and how that then led into, following literally the words of Christ into helping others.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, music, it's interesting to look back now and think about how music, it's hard to know whether or not music was just like, it was the stepping stone, the beginning of the funnel that pushed me into this work. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's something about being an artist and paying attention. There's a guy named poet and a theologian named John O'Donohue, and he uses this phrase of watchful reverence. And it really is, it's a posture of going throughout your day. We could call it mindfulness nowadays in a way, but it's looking out and seeing where in the midst of hard things, good things are also happening, or beautiful things are also present. And I think that was a commitment that I made, maybe subconsciously or unknowingly as a kid when I started playing music and caring about what was happening around me and looking like I started to have that kind of watchful reverence that good things were happening and I should pay attention. So I think from that, looking at the Bloodwater story, it's hard to wrap justice and issues about poverty into music in a way that actually does it justice. I mean, we've seen it fail. There's so many songs out there where artists have tried to describe or do something to help a cause, but they end up kind of dehumanizing people in their story, or their subject matter becomes less human because they haven't really loved their subject well yet. And I think about the Christmas song, Do They Know It's Christmas Time? And how much backlash they get for that, because people in Africa are kind of going, well, yeah, of course. Yeah, we know it's Christmas time, of course. But the questions become a little bit skewed when you start to add art into it. And so it takes you really do have to care about the people that you want to write about. And that was hard to do for a long time. So we as a band actually stayed away from it. We didn't talk about Africa in our music for a long time, even though we wanted to. We just couldn't find a way to tell the story, that actually just highlighted people and made them the hero and gave them the due they were, that they should have. And so that was challenging. But over the years, I think the conversations we were having, we were so entrenched in that conversation that the music just started to seep into the songs. And it would be more taking the subject of dignity, or taking the subject of service or humility, and making that the song. And so they became more what we wanted to see as the values of stepping into places like Africa, that we wanted to see those things come to light. So music really became like that. That was really the evolution for us as a band. Was we were certainly providing resources and letting our audience know about what we cared about, but then it became about now that you know, what do you do with what you know, and how do you do it? And those were the questions we started asking in our music, but it took a lot of time.
Fascinating.
Well, one of my favorite albums that you guys have, you know, been out there with for quite a long time is an album called Good Monsters, which I think you go head on and finally tackle a lot of the things you were just describing. I mean, I'm looking at the song list right now. My favorite song on that album is a song called "Oh My God," which basically you list the things that you kind of question about why is this happening, and where is God in it. And it's actually one of the most meaningful songs I've ever heard. And then there's several other, like "There's a River" and "Light Gives Heat," where you're out there now. You're in the marketplace of challenging, you know, the faith of it, and also, the heart of it, and the head and the heart. And is that an accurate reading?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that was the album where it kind of came together, where those ideas of justice and mercy really started to form into songs. Yeah, it's funny. Well, not funny, but that "Oh My God" came from me reading just a sidebar article in a newspaper. And I think the headline was, it was something about some celebrity couple that was splitting up or something, and might have been a Kardashian thing. I don't remember, but what I do remember is that this little tiny sidebar was describing these kids in a hospital in India, and they were saying that there were kids that were, laying three to a bed, and then there were three kids under the bed on slabs of cardboard, and the only way for a bed to become open for one of those children on cardboard was for one of the kids on the bed to pass away. And it was just this small little article about how hospitals in a lot of developing countries and communities are inadequate, and that was it. And I became so kind of infuriated at our culture at large, that our priority is not that that's a headline. We are so distracted by our trivia, that was just this tiny sidebar. And I walked into the studio that morning, and we were recording the lyrics for that song, "Oh My God," and I just kind of had to rant. And so I went into the vocal booth, and we were trying to make that song an entire, just a single performance with everybody playing together. And we had no idea if we could pull it off, but we did it. And the words that came out on the album version is the one time we sang that song and performed it in the studio. We did two takes of that song, and it's one of the two. That's the first one we did, and that's how they came out.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, I mean, I pulled up the lyrics, the last, sort of stanzas. "Sometimes when I lose my grip, I wonder what to make of heaven. All the times I thought to reach up, all the times I had to give up." I mean, that just kind of says it all there. And then next is "Babies underneath their beds and hospitals that cannot treat them. All the wounds that money causes, all the comforts of cathedrals." You just go after everybody there.
Yeah, I was angry.
I mean, you don't leave anything. That's what I think, speaks so well about your music in general, is that when you go to a very raw place, it's very, very powerful. And there, it seemed like the first time I heard it, it was the final melding of what you were trying to do with Bloodwater and what you're trying to do with your music.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a singer-songwriter named Mary Gaucher, who's in Nashville, and she's wonderful. She does a lot of work with veterans who have come back with PTSD, and she does songwriting with them. And I've done a couple of workshops with her, co-led with, as a songwriter. And she would always say that, songwriting is about confession, being willing to confess. And you'll always know it in a song when an artist, like, they almost get to that point where they're going to tell you the thing they need to say, and then they go to like a broad description of a mountain or a river or the sky, and you go, oh, they pulled out. They didn't go there. And her challenge has always been confess. If you're going to write something, then make the confession, tell it like it is. And I've always loved that challenge, and so I've adapted to that very much.
That's a hard thing to do for a lot of artists.
Yeah.
To really to go deep and make sure that they're communicating their hearts. So you're to be commended for putting that on paper and putting that in song.
Well, and to not being concerned about whether there is a commercial viability of that. This was your heart, you know. Like, there's so much in music that's just, well, that's not going to sell, so we're not going to do it. And that's sad, because it's the authenticity of a song like that came about in a way that it did, that just makes it magic.
Yeah. And it comes out of an era where, you know, we were making albums still, at least as a band. That was our headspace. We wanted to make an album where every song on the record was part of a whole experience, and the song that you play next benefits from the one that came before it and the one after it. And so it leaves room. Not every song has to be, you know, an up-tempo pop single. For us, our mindset has always left room for those songs that had to be introspective or had to be more confessional that way. And I've been grateful for that with Jars of Clay, that there's always been that elbow room to do that.
Yeah, well, several years ago, as I was getting to know the band and Bloodwater, and my wife and I hosted a private concert down in Tucson.
Really?
And you know, how I came involved was just really almost like as a lark, really. I've been a U2 fan for a long time, and you mentioned, do they know it's Christmas? I mean, I think Bono was really the only one who took that as an action item. Like, I should get involved in what's really going on. And so he did. And he was very, very active during that time when Bloodwater was formed, obviously. I remember reading about him being in Nashville, and all these Christian artists were there, and he challenged them that they were missing, you know, the miracle. They were missing what their calling could be in terms of Africa. And thinking, well, if I'm a fan, then what should I be doing? I mean, the One campaign was this big thing. Can't really wrap your arms around that. That's really for governments and corporations. And so, as an individual, what could I do? And I saw that Jars had formed this charity, and I kind of reached out to them and gave a donation. And then Sasha and I put on a private concert in the Grove at Tucson Country Club, and I guess I could say we raised $50,000.
Is that right? Wow.
In one evening. And I remember meeting with the band ahead of time, and I said, okay, I don't know if you're prepared for this, but can you just play one song? And it was, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep. I remember that night. I remember it. You know, the interesting thing about Bono is he that day when he came to Nashville and he met with musicians was the day that I was leaving to go to Africa for the first time. So that was my first experience, and I was heading to Malawi, which was the first country that he went to that actually really gave him like the passion for what he was doing. And we have this great photograph because I had to get up and leave the meeting early to get to the airport. He stands up and I stand up, and he goes in to give me a hug. And so I went in to give him a hug, and someone snapped a photo right at that point. But what it looks like is that we're each taking a swing at each other. The photo looks like we're about to like just go at it. And it's just the funniest photo that I keep. I've had it now for all these years, but it's just a wonderful photo of what looks like Bono and I about to get in the fist fight, which he would have won because he has way more Irish in him than I do.
Well, that was one of those things I read about, and I just felt convicted that either this is for real or not. And then there's the really famous photo of Bono and George W. Bush actually coming from a meeting they had in the Oval Office where, Bono was changing hearts, changing minds all over the Capitol.
Right.
And that was the last stop, I think, to where they were able to create this amazing partnership. And we talk politics on this podcast, and that was one of those things where he was able to transcend politics on this one issue. Even got Jesse Helms, the head of the the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, got down on their knees and prayed in Jesse Helms' office. I know because John Desser was there, and I have a picture of it. And so amazing things came out of that.
Yeah.
That meeting with those artists and what he was doing in DC.
What, shifting a little bit, what's the future now for Bloodwater, and how do you see things evolving over the next, few years, but you talk about hitting your 20-year mark in 2024. What's 2044 going to look like?
I think we, and Dan can speak into this, I think we have gone through iterations of trying to figure out where we are best living into our model. And to Dan's point, it's easy to say we want to work through local African leaders. And a lot of people are, or even can say that and are saying it now. It's kind of the things to say is we work through local African leaders. And I think the challenge becomes when you do that, you really truly have to roll up your sleeves and get in the kind of the muck with them and go, all right, we're asking you to implement these water projects or HIV groups on a large scale across this continent. But in the midst of that, we're also asking you as an organization to have really great financial policies and really great human resources and a strategic plan. And you've got to, if you're just funneling money over to implement projects, you're really not serving, I would say, the whole person of these organizations. You're just serving, beneficiaries, and it might not serve the local African leader well. So what we've tried to hone in on is saying, okay, we're going to implement these projects, but we really care about the people that are implementing the projects on a community level. And we want to raise up local African leaders that whenever Bloodwater or any large NGOs across the state, if they have to pull out because of the pandemic, or if they have to pull out for funding, these local NGOs can stand on their own and be the ones that are serving these populations, have access to funding, and don't need us to be there to do it. So I think for what continues to be for us ahead is saying, okay, who are these smallish groups that really need investment beyond just money for a water project, but need somebody to say, hey, you need some leadership coaching. How can we serve you while you're serving these others? And I think that's what's ahead. So we've tried to, it's easy to get in like metrics mindset of saying, we want to serve 2 million people in, the next 2 years. And you could go do that, and you could actually probably do that pretty easily if you just had enough money. But is that really effective development? So I think we were even saying it's more of, what we're seeing these small organizations do versus we're trying to hit a big number. And there's a place for that, and I get it. And there's a lot of nonprofits that have done really well by just throwing out big, tall goals and trying to hit them. But I think for Bloodwater, we're trying to go deeper versus wider, and then affect the sector overall by folks saying, man, Bloodwater does it a little bit differently, but the projects they're doing are more sustainable and longer lasting. Maybe we should all start thinking about implementing projects this way versus just how many people can we serve as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that is such a great view and way to go about it as far as a sustainability issue, because it doesn't do anybody any good if you go in and serve a bunch of people for a few months or a year, and then it's gone.
Right. I remember I took some donors over on a visit a couple of years ago, and we were at a school, and this wasn't a Bloodwater project. They were just showing us some of the work they were doing. And as a way to illustrate kind of how development gone wrong can happen, we were watching a well being built at this school. And we had just come out of a community, not 5-10 miles away, that really needed a water point, but had not had one. Nobody had put it in. And so as we're watching this water point be put in, we looked across the way, and not 100 yards of the way, there was another water point. So we're all looking at each other going, why are we building 2 wells on this school when 5 miles down the road this community doesn't have a water point? And the organization at the time said, well, a large NGO out of the U.S. said, we want to put 1,000 wells in schools across Africa. They pull up a GPS map, they drop a bunch of dots, and they just go tell these organizations, start putting wells at schools. And it was that really kind of high level top down approach of, we raise money for this, we're telling our donors we're doing this, and we're not really worried about the outcome of it. We just want to say, hey, we put wells in schools. And I think that's where you have to flip it around and go to these African organizations and these communities and say, what do you guys actually need and where do you want it, versus just checking off a list here in the U.S.
Yeah, I would, even just to piggyback onto that, one of the statistics that I heard, I think came out of the World Health Organization, was that a clean water project, like a borehole clean water well, that is implemented, drilled, and put in, that doesn't have community investment, involvement, and ownership, lasts on average 18 months.
Yeah.
So it's a year and a half before that well is no longer working. And then projects that have an ownership within the community and that are locally maintained are, those projects can last upwards of 20 years. So it's a pretty massive difference between having local ownership and not having local ownership. And even to Jake's point is we've seen communities where a clean water well was implemented and people have just walked right past it and continued to go to the river or stream. And when you ask them, why aren't people using the well? And the answer is, well, we're not sure whose that is.
Oh my.
Wow.
And you realize,
because there's not
that's
that community partnership. There's not that ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I remember
somebody
talking
paid money.
about this
Yeah.
before.
You gave money for it. Yeah.
Somebody has a photo of that well probably, and they're going, wow, I feel really great because I helped put clean water in Africa. And you realize, but it hasn't had an impact on the actual health benefit. So
Because there's no relationship. There's no community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that vision of Bloodwater is what's always really enticed me to be involved. That wanting to build community.
Well, this has been really a fascinating conversation. Tell us how people can find you guys and help out and get involved. This has been fantastic. We appreciate it.
Wow. Thank you for having us. Jake, I can let you talk about ways to be involved.
Yeah, the easy way certainly is our website. I mean, just jump on there. Bloodwater.org is where you can find information about the organization as a whole. But we really encourage, when you hear us talk about, community-driven projects and using local leaders, and Dan can probably speak to this. We were really founded on the fact that communities are creative and can find solutions. And I think that plays right in Africa, but also plays just right here in the States. And we have options like lemonade stands and, online fundraising campaigns that you can do to raise money for Bloodwater. But we just encourage folks to be creative and think outside the box and go, all right, how can I get my family involved in something that matters? And I've got 3 kids, and I know we're all the time, my wife and I are looking for ways to get our kids' head out of their own kind of world. And it's things like saying, okay, if you guys are looking for something to do today, maybe that's going through the neighborhood and washing cars and saying, hey, this water that we're just pouring out of these cars is now going to provide clean water for somebody in Africa. So we hate to limit folks, but we would say, you can certainly go on the website and make gifts, but be creative. We love the creativity that we see when folks are engaging their family and communities in this.
What a great perspective.
Look, you can host a concert, just like, you can do it all.
Well, I mean, is that an option anymore, Dan, or you guys?
It is an option.
I shouldn't speak for Dan.
Yeah.
It is an option. I did just turn 49, so
Happy birthday,
it
by the
feels
way.
like the window is closing on people wanting to see a nearly 50-year-old get up and play rock and roll. But I know there's some different. We still have the Springsteens of the world that people love to see, but I don't know. But we're ready.
Great.
Invite us to come
We got to
play.
get them out here.
That's great. Well, you guys just had like a Christmas concert in Nashville that was pretty well received. So there's still some fuel in the tank there
That's
somewhere.
good.
What
Always.
about that, Dan? You see Jars?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Reforming in an album type setting one of these years.
I think we will keep making music. I think we're not sure about the touring aspect of it all. That's a hard place right now. And obviously with COVID, it's just been challenging for artists that are out there. And, we did it for 24 years and it was fun and amazing. And I don't think I want to do it anymore, but I'm not sure. I'm open to anything these days. Life on life's terms, not mine. So
Yeah.
There you go. Following God's will. Maybe it's God's will to get you out there.
Well, God bless you guys. Appreciate you both coming on. Appreciate your friendship, and wish you the best of the new year.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And with that, this is a podcast that's founded on the principles of faith, freedom, and free enterprise.
Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for being with us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.